Hey there, Misfits. This is Kate.
And this is Kevin.
Welcome to Horrorwood. Don't have any biz nasty, I don't think, to cover.
Think so.
And this is going to be kind of a long episode, so I think we're just going to dive right on in.
I love it. I'm ready for a story.
Okay, great. It's a long one.
Okay.
I will also say this is going to be in 2 parts, and you've already seen the title, so that you know that we're talking about Sid Vicious and Nancy Spungen. When people talk about this case, they mostly talk about Sid Vicious because he was the more famous of the two. He was the bassist for the Sex Pistols. But I was curious about Nancy because she's kind of a footnote in the story. And she actually is killed, which we'll get into, obviously. But I was trying to find more stuff about her because every article was mainly focused on him.
Yeah.
So I did find a book that her mom wrote, and it's called "And I Don't Want to Live This Life, a mother's story of her daughter's murder." Was it murder? I don't know. And we'll talk about it.
Okay.
Not everyone agrees with the police about what they say happened. So like I said, it's going to be in 2 parts. In part 2, we'll talk about Sid Vicious and the Sex Pistols and what happened the night of each of their deaths, of both Sid and Nancy.
Oh, Sid's dead too.
Yes.
Okay.
But for part 1, I just want to focus on Nancy.
Got you.
On Thursday, October 12th, 1978, just before 7:30 a.m., Vera Mendelsohn awoke to what she described as the sound of a woman moaning coming from the room next to hers at the Chelsea Hotel in New York City.
I know that hotel.
Have you stayed in it?
I don't think so, but I know I have friends who've stayed there.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Chelsea Hotel is like iconic because people like Bob Dylan and Andy Warhol and like all these big names have stayed there, but it's also like really dingy and
I was going to say it's not a good hotel.
Yeah, it's not
like
great.
It's like a cheaper one now, right?
Yeah. Vera said about this noise that she heard, she said it didn't sound as though someone was with her because she didn't call someone's name. She was just moaning.
Okay.
Vera said she was very frightened by the sounds, though not frightened enough to call the police, apparently. And when the moans eventually stopped, she fell back asleep. A few hours later, the blood-soaked body of 20-year-old Nancy Spungen was removed from room 100 of the Chelsea Hotel.
Fuck.
Her death was the result of a single stab wound to the abdomen, and her boyfriend, Sid Vicious, once the bassist for the English punk band The Sex Pistols, was arrested for her murder.
Got it. Now, was Sid, I know we're talking about Sid in part 2, but was he, at this time, was he still a member of Sex Pistols or not?
They had disbanded at this time.
Okay.
Yeah. Just 4 months later, out on bail and awaiting trial, Sid Vicious died of a heroin overdose.
Oh, fuck.
With their primary suspect dead, the NYPD closed the case. And what really happened to Nancy Spungen on that October morning remains a mystery.
I just want to interject really quick. I know you said a heroin overdose. I just saw a video on TikTok of a woman getting pulled over in her car, and she had a pet raccoon.
The raccoon with the meth pipe? Okay, I was just talking to Matt about that earlier because it was in Ohio, and he's from Ohio.
Right.
And I was like, Matt.
What
he goes, well, that sounds about right.
That tracks. Yeah.
Yikes. I hope everyone's okay. For months, fans flocked to the building where Sid OD'd, leaving flowers and candles and letters to their punk idol. But Nancy's death elicited quite a different response. Newspapers ran headlines like, "Nancy was a witch."
What?
Yeah. Sid's own mother despised her, and she was dubbed Nauseating Nancy.
Fuck that.
Sid's former bandmates had always hated Nancy. They thought she talked too much. They thought she was too loud. They blamed her for taking up too much of Sid's time and claimed it was she who had gotten him hooked on heroin, despite that Sid's own mother had been a heroin addict long before Nancy came into the picture.
Oh, God. It's one of those I can still smoke crack and be a good mom type situations.
She is a whole vibe, so
Yikes.
we'll talk about her in part 2.
Okay.
The media's treatment of Nancy Spungen was felt the hardest, of course, by Nancy's own family. Although her mom, Deborah, always felt that her daughter's lifestyle would likely lead to an early death, like she saw this coming.
Okay.
But Nancy was still her baby. She was her firstborn. Nancy had always had trouble making and keeping friends. She found it difficult to control her anger. She bullied her own brother and sister. She attempted suicide more than once. And growing up, her presence at home began to tear the family apart, as it would.
Yeah.
But Nancy's erratic behavior might not have been that of a rebellious kid acting out. It likely stemmed from something more scientific and beyond her control. Something that occurred the moment she came into the world.
Whoa.
19-year-old Deborah Spungen, or Deb, was in her senior year at the University of Pennsylvania when she became pregnant with Nancy. Her husband, Frank, was in the Army and stationed at Fort Knox, Kentucky, when Deb found out they were going to have a baby. The two of them had been living in a small apartment on campus, but once he got stationed in Kentucky, she reluctantly moved back in with her mom because now she's pregnant. She's going to need some help. Deb's mom did not approve of the pregnancy. She thought Deb was too young because, they were already married and everything, but she just thought that Deb was too young.
I get that. 19 is
sure,
pretty young.
But also this was the 50s.
Oh, well then that is a little weird because I feel like they were get them babies making.
Yeah. And Deb and Frank, granted, they hadn't planned on becoming pregnant so soon. They were hoping to wait a few years after they'd moved to New York and started their careers, which is probably what her mom was upset about. she was going to an Ivy League school. It's I want you to have your career first. So I could see that.
I get it.
But Deb said abortion wasn't an option because it was the 1950s. And in her own words, she said, a nice Jewish girl just didn't do that. With Frank away and her mom not supporting the pregnancy, Deb didn't really have anyone to talk about what was going on, what she was going through. Her dad had died when she was a baby and she was an only child. So she doesn't have anyone in the family really to talk to, and none of her friends had had babies yet. So she was feeling pretty alone. That's
very isolating.
Yeah. And unfortunately, her doctor always seemed like he just didn't have time for her. He'd rush through her exams. He would just feel her abdomen for a couple minutes and be like, okay, the baby's fine, and then leave the room.
Oh, God, these doctors, even today.
The healthcare system all around in this story is
abysmal.
Yes.
That's the first word whenever someone says healthcare that I always think of.
True. It tracks. As a new mom-to-be, Deb had a lot of questions, obviously, for the doctor, but she never felt comfortable enough asking him because he was intimidating and he acted like he was just too busy. About 5 months into her pregnancy, Deb went to her mom's room one evening and all she said was, I'm nauseated in the morning, hoping for some kind of reassurance,
sympathy.
Oh, that's totally normal, honey. But her mom just ignored her. So Deb asked if she had gotten morning sickness when she was pregnant with her, and all her mom said was, a couple of times when I had my coffee, we should buy you some maternity clothes. And that was the only conversation the two of them had about Deb's pregnancy. This is this woman's grandchild coming into the world.
That's bad.
So you can imagine how she must have been feeling during this time. I'm sure she was scared out of her mind.
Shitless.
Frank did come home shortly after that, so that did help a little bit.
Okay.
Then one windy afternoon in February, on a bitterly cold day, the ground is covered in ice cold, Deb was sitting in class at school when all of a sudden she felt multiple sharp pains shoot through her. And she was like, are these contractions? Am I in labor? She had no idea. She just sat there and finally the pain went away after a few minutes. And so she was like, okay, I guess I'm all right. By the time class was over, she was exhausted, so she went home. Frank and her mom were both at work, so she was home alone, and she said she thought about calling the doctor, but didn't want to bother him, so she just took a nap.
Bother the doctor.
This poor girl.
Honey.
She woke up about an hour later to warm water running from between her legs, but she didn't know what that meant. So she did call the doctor, and he told her, oh, it's probably your water bag. And she asked, does that mean I'm in labor? And he was like, you might be. She was concerned because she wasn't due for another 5 weeks. And he said, well, it might mean nothing. Just rest and call me back if there's any change.
Her fucking water broke. This poor girl. She's like, I have no idea what's happening. And they're like, meh, you're fine.
Yeah, just rest.
Just ride it out.
And I mean, I've never been through a pregnancy, so I don't, like, I know that you're not supposed to just rush to the hospital right away.
Sure.
But I do also feel like when your water breaks, that's kind of the time to go. I don't know, though. Maybe it's not. Maybe that's like a normal thing, so I don't know. I'm sure someone's going to tell us.
I mean, I'm only speaking from movies and TV.
Sure.
The water breaks and all hell breaks loose.
That's what I feel.
And the kid comes flying out like
Just
a basketball.
shoots out of there. Later, Frank got home, and it was a good thing because Deb did start having contractions soon after.
Okay.
As soon as he got her to the hospital, a nurse whisks her away in a wheelchair because this was before you could have a guest with you in the room. So she was all alone.
Of course.
They ended up drugging her, and she slept through the entire birth.
Okay.
Nancy Laura Spungen was born at 6:52 a.m. on February 27th, 1958. Deb's grandmother was named Nancy, which is how the baby got her name. Deb was pretty out of it and drifted back and forth between being awake and being asleep. But one of the times she was awake, she sees Frank sitting next to her on the bed. So the first thing she asked, she's like, oh, did you see her? Because she hadn't seen Nancy yet because she'd been out of it. And he says, yes, I saw her. And Deb's like, well, how'd she look, you know? Frank said, beautiful. And Deb noticed Frank had like a funny expression on his face, like there was something he wasn't saying. And she said, are you okay? He said, of course. And Deb was still pretty out of it, and Frank hadn't really slept much the night before either, so he said he was going to go home and he'd be back later. Once Deb had slept off her sedation, she woke up and waited for the doctor to bring her the baby. So this is the same doctor that she's gone to for all the exams, the one she felt was too busy.
He didn't just drop it in the hallway and say, oh, your baby's outside.
Well, just let her rest.
Jesus.
So finally he comes in, this doctor, and he's like, how are you feeling? She said, oh, I'm okay. Can I see my baby? And he sat down next to her, and she immediately knew something was wrong.
Oh.
Because he doesn't take time with her, you know? So
there's like a caring energy, and she's like, what?
She's like, wait, this is different.
This is wrong. Something's off.
So Deb asked the doctor again, can I see my baby? And that's when he said the words that all new parents fear. He said, she's experiencing some problems. Nancy was born with the umbilical cord wrapped around her neck and was cyanotic. In other words, she was blue because she had been deprived of oxygen. The doctor gave Nancy a drug to increase the function of her heart, and her vital signs were improving, but he was concerned because she was jaundiced, and her jaundice wasn't improving.
Blue and yellow? Cyanotic. Does that like mean like cyan, like blue?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Okay, medical terms.
There you go. The English language.
Who knew? A lot of people did.
He called in a pediatric hematologist, which is someone who specializes in blood disorders in children.
Okay.
And he diagnosed Nancy as having an ABO incompatibility. In the most general of terms, as I understand it, this occurs when the mother's blood type differs from the baby's. Deb had type O positive blood. Mm-hmm. Type O is the universal blood type. So if you're type O, you can give blood to anyone. Like Matt's type O. So he gives blood like every 6 weeks or whatever it is.
Do you know your type?
I'm an A.
I don't know my blood type.
Yeah, next physical, check your blood type. I had to ask my doctor to specifically check it because I didn't know what mine was. And I was like, can you also test my blood and tell me what I am?
Shit.
Although type O is the blood that can go to anyone, type O's can only receive O. When you're type O, you have antibodies against type A and type B.
Ooh.
So if Nancy was type A or type B, which her blood type isn't listed anywhere, but it's likely one of those, then Deb's antibodies can basically attack Nancy's red blood cells during pregnancy.
That's awful.
Yeah. They have tests now that can test for that sort of thing to let you know, like, if there is going to be an issue. But back then, that didn't exist.
That's insane. There's like an internal blood battle.
That really is that, yeah. Additionally, Nancy's bilirubin levels were really high. Bilirubin is a yellowish-orange pigment that forms in the liver when red blood cells break down. Red blood cells are supposed to break down. They go through a natural cycle. But if Deb's antibodies were attacking Nancy's red blood cells in the womb, then those cells are breaking down faster than they should. Ooh. So that bilirubin is forming faster than the placenta can manage. Once a baby is born, the liver takes over removing bilirubin, but because Nancy was born 5 weeks premature, her liver's not fully functioning yet. So Nancy's already going through a lot of trauma for being just a few hours old.
Oh my God.
Higher bilirubin levels can lead to neurological damage, including movement and vision problems, cerebral palsy, and learning disabilities. For babies like Nancy that have this ABO incompatibility, 20 milligrams per deciliter of bilirubin is typically the danger zone where neurological problems can start to occur. And in her book that I mentioned at the top of the episode, Deb wrote that Nancy's levels were over 19 milligrams per deciliter.
Yikes.
I don't know if that means they were 19.1 or if they were 23. We just don't know, but they were extremely high for a little 6-pound, 5-ounce baby. The treatment was to do a series of transfusions. They'd take out the damaged red blood cells and replace them with healthy cells. They couldn't do it in one transfusion because they said it would be too much of a shock for Nancy's little body. And all this time, Deb still hasn't even gotten to see Nancy, much less hold her. So she did get to see her briefly through the nursery window the next morning, right before they took her back for her transfusion, but that was it. During the procedure, Nancy was screaming and kicking so uncontrollably, the hematologist had to tie her down. And he said that was the first time that had ever happened during an exchange transfusion.
Was this one of those times when, because I read somewhere that they used to not give babies like anesthesia because they didn't realize that they could feel
that I'm not
pain.
sure about.
Oh God. I mean, this is the 50s, so you know it's
you never
not,
know.
You never know. You know it's like not great.
Once the procedure was over and Nancy was back in the nursery, Deb and Frank asked to see her. They still didn't get to hold her, but they could look through the window. So they're looking at all these babies who are sound asleep, very quiet and still. And then in the very back of the room is Nancy in an enclosed incubator, screaming bloody murder and kicking and thrashing about.
Baby.
Deb's like, is she okay? And the doctor said, yeah, don't worry. She's not in any pain. But like she's clearly having a traumatic episode in there.
There's something wrong.
So a nurse takes her out of the incubator to try and feed her. And Nancy is waving her arms and kicking her legs like crazy. She kicks the nurse. And then with her little hands, which were balled up into fists, Nancy starts hitting herself in the face. And all this time she's screaming at the top of her lungs.
Ugh.
The nurse couldn't get her to calm down, so she just put her back in the incubator. On one hand, Deb's thinking, well, she's really active, so that must be a good sign. But on the other, she's like, something's wrong with my child.
Of course.
It was another 2 days before they finally let Deb hold Nancy and nurse her. Originally, the doctor had said Nancy would need a series of transfusions, but after just the one procedure, they said her bilirubin levels had stabilized and she was free to go home. So Deb's like, okay, great. Well, when do you need to see her again, like for a follow-up? Yeah. And they said, oh, we don't. Her reflexes are normal. We checked for central nervous damage. Everything's good. She's a totally normal baby. But things didn't feel normal with Nancy as far as Deb and Frank were concerned. She screamed constantly. Like not just your typical baby crying, but blood-curdling screams. She screamed when they fed her. She screamed when they bathed her. She screamed when they changed her diaper. She screamed when they put her to bed. She screamed first thing when she woke up in the morning. She screamed all day long. A nanny that the Spungens had for the first 2 weeks of Nancy's life, just someone they had to help settle, like for them to settle in once they brought the baby home, told Deb that Nancy's screaming could be attributed to Deb's demeanor. She was like, the baby can sense that you're anxious and it's making her anxious, so try to relax. That didn't help. The first pediatrician Deb took her to told Deb she probably wasn't producing enough milk, which was making Nancy scream because she was always hungry. So Deb stopped nursing and switched to formula. That didn't make any difference. So the doctor told her, all right, just try putting her on solid food. Deb switched to solid food. Nancy was eating fine. She was putting on more weight than average due to the solid food, but she didn't stop screaming. Deb ended up taking her to a new pediatrician who said, you're overfeeding her. She's eating way too much. Then he asked what she did when Nancy would cry at night after she'd gone to bed. And Deb was like, well, I go and try to comfort her. The doctor said, well, that's your problem. You're spoiling her. You should let her cry it out. No matter who she went to, they all said it was her fault.
That makes me so mad for her. Through this pregnancy, then through even having the baby, everything is her doing it wrong.
It's awful.
And that is disgusting.
Deb and Frank tried the cry it out method for a week, but it didn't help. Nancy would scream for about 2 hours before falling asleep, but the slightest sound would wake her up and she'd be screaming again. Basically, if she was awake, she was screaming. And Deb and Frank were beginning to fight because they're at their wits' end and neither of them have slept. At this point, Nancy was 3 months old, so they've been dealing with incessant screaming for 12 weeks or so.
That's crazy. I mean, she's internalizing what we all feel just being alive. Just a constant scream
Just a
internally.
Scream. Deb calls the pediatrician and is like, nothing is helping. She's still screaming constantly. So the pediatrician prescribed Nancy liquid phenobarbital to help her sleep. Phenobarbital is a type of barbiturate. It's a Schedule 4 controlled substance, and I finally looked up the difference in the schedules.
We've talked about schedules so many times, and we're like, ooh. What?
Well, because I'd heard of Schedule 1 and Schedule 2, so I thought it was just 2.
Yeah.
So controlled substances fall under 5 schedules.
Oh.
Schedule 1 has the highest potential for misuse, like heroin.
Mm-hmm.
Schedule 5 has the lowest risk. So phenobarbital, being a Schedule 4, has some risk of physical or psychological dependence. When phenobarbital is prescribed to infants, it's usually for the purpose of controlling seizures. It is still used today, but other effective medications have come on the market, so it's really up to the doctor. But back then, I think it was the go-to for doctors because it worked and it was cost-effective. It's a sedative, so it's meant to help calm the activity in the brain, which is why it's prescribed for babies with seizures. A dose is typically only given once per day or maybe twice a day, depending on the patient, and it's supposed to be short-term. Taken long-term, it can have adverse effects. Nancy's pediatrician instructed Deb to give her the drug every 4 hours.
That's a lot.
Now, Nancy has not been diagnosed with having seizures, so keep that in mind. So that's a pretty high dose regardless, but especially when Nancy doesn't even have the condition it's typically used for. The drug didn't help. The screaming continued, and Nancy was becoming even more active than she had been. Active, I mean like the screaming, the flailing of the arms, that kind of thing.
So even with the phenobarbital, it's still there?
Phenobarbital can cause hyperactivity, though Deb said that Nancy didn't technically fall into the category of a hyperactive child. She doesn't elaborate on that in the book, but she's saying that she wasn't technically hyperactive.
Right.
Aside from all the screaming, Nancy was a very smart little girl. She started talking pretty early and had an impressive vocabulary for a baby who wasn't even a year old. Once she started crawling, it was game over. She always wanted to be moving. She was restless. But some physical issues Nancy'd had since birth were starting to become more prominent now that she was a little bit older. She had to wear a splint on her feet. It's called the Dennis Brown splint. It's intended to correct clubfoot.
Okay.
I just want to note, Deb states it was Nancy's legs that were growing at an irregular angle, as opposed to like her having clubfoot. So that's just something in the book.
Okay.
And basically the splint consists of shoes attached to a heavy aluminum bar. So when Nancy wears it, it holds her feet and legs in a certain position. So she would just crawl around dragging this heavy aluminum bar behind her.
That's crazy. And she's also like talking in full sentences.
Yeah.
She's like, hello, mother. How are you today? I want to crawl and scream before 1-year-old. Just this little, that's scary, but also amazing.
One of her eyes was also beginning to noticeably cross, and she was unable to keep her tongue in her mouth. But Deb's biggest concern was Nancy's behavior. There was a park across the street from where they lived that they'd go to regularly, and while all the other babies are just chilling in their strollers, Nancy's crawling all over the place. So one day while at the park, Deb went over to Nancy and picked her up, and the screaming started.
Ah, shit.
Deb tried to comfort her, but in response, Nancy went completely stiff, like arms and legs straight as a board, head back, face bright red. She's screaming bloody murder. And of course, now all the other moms are staring, and I'm sure Deb is thinking, great, now all these people think that I'm
like an asshole.
Yeah, like, am I abusing my child or something? Nancy started doing the whole stiffening up thing more and more. Deb couldn't cuddle her to try and soothe her without Nancy tightening her whole body. Once again, Deb consulted the pediatrician, who looked at Nancy crawling around his office and went, she seems fine.
I can't with these doctors, Kate. It's going to kill me.
Deb's like, but she won't even let me hug her without stiffening up. And he said, well, she's just not affectionate. Don't take it personally. The 1950s.
This decade was a trip, y'all. And I mean, having parents that were born in the 50s, fuck.
Deb was like, what about her crossed eye and her tongue not staying in her mouth? And he said, well, that could be a sign of a neurological problem, but we can rule that out because she's so smart. She can talk.
Yeah, and she's just being goofy, honey. Don't worry about it.
Just wait it out.
Just wait it out.
He asked about the screaming, if there was any improvement there, and Deb was like, no, it hasn't gotten any better. So his solution? Let's just up her phenobarbital dosage. About a year and a half after Nancy was born, her little sister Susan came along.
A baby.
Things only get worse from here.
No.
Nancy began having recurring nightmares, and her fits became more violent. When she was 2, the family decided to move to a bigger house, and while they were packing up, a guy from the telephone company came to disconnect their phones. Deb's in the next room, and suddenly she hears this man scream, "Lady, get her the hell off of me!" So Deb runs into the room to see what's happening, and 2-year-old Nancy had grabbed hold of his leg and was punching him with her little fists, screaming, "Put my phone back! Put it back!" It took every ounce of Deb's strength to pry Nancy away from this man. And when she finally did, Nancy just kept kicking and screaming, "Put it back! Put it back!" She continued screaming for an hour even after the man left.
This just went into horror movie territory. What?
This whole story is just like so sad from every angle.
Yeah.
This kind of incident happened over and over again. Nancy would work herself up into such a state. Her face would get really red. She'd start hitting herself in the face. And then she'd eventually hyperventilate and pass out. Then one morning, Deb was making the bed when Nancy came in and said she wanted her to come outside and play with her. And Deb said, sure, give me 10 minutes. Nancy, who speaks with a stutter at this point, I'm not going to, because I'm going to say what she said. I'm not going to speak with a stutter. But
I was going to say, Kate, maybe we should.
I'm just going to let you know that she speaks with a stutter at this point.
Okay.
Nancy says, remember, she's 2. If you don't go out with me right now, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go into your closet and I'm going to take your blue blouse, your red dress, your green skirt with the lace on it, and your yellow sweater. And then I'm going to go through your dresser drawer and I'm going to get all of your nightgowns and slips and underwear. And I'm going to get a pair of scissors and I'm going to cut into little strips your blue blouse, your red dress, your green skirt with the lace on it, your yellow sweater, your nightgowns, your slips, and your underwear. And after I've cut them into little strips, I'm going to take them outside and put them under the cars in the street so they can run over them. If you don't go out with me right now, that's what I'm going to do.
Period. Nancy, I'm taking that when I'm telling people that when I need to tell somebody off. I'm going to go to your house. I'm going to take all your shit out of the closet. I'm going to chop it up and I'm going to put it under a car. Now go out with me.
That's going to make me want to hang out with you.
I'm on Nancy's side now, girl.
Deb froze.
Sure. Well,
as you can imagine.
Coming from a 2-year-old, I would be like, what?
Then Nancy started it all over again. I'm going to take your blue blouse, your red dress, your green skirt with the lace on it. She goes through the whole list again, and she is screaming this. Deb asked her to stop, but she didn't. So she picked her up, and Nancy started punching her mom.
Oh, my God.
Deb put her hand over Nancy's mouth to try to get her to stop screaming, but instead, Nancy bit her. Deb put her down, and Nancy is still screaming. But then all of a sudden, it was like something switched in her brain. Nancy was quiet and sat down and started coloring in her coloring book. Like nothing had happened.
I relate to this.
Oh, my God.
And also that speech is the new old maiden type of shoes.
Oh, I'm going to take your blue blouse. I'm going to take your red dress.
Sorry, I just want to say, funny, yes, this is awful. Obviously, she's unregulated, like emotionally. There's something going on. Mm-hmm. Terrible.
Deb calls the pediatrician, who says, oh, I've never heard of anything like that. And Deb's like, cool, what do I do? And his sage medical advice, he says, well, don't let her do that.
Shit.
Deb's like, but how do I keep her from doing that?
And he just goes, I don't know, and walks away. Fuck her.
Well, no, he actually upped the phenobarbital dosage yet again.
They're just dumping it down her throat.
So Nancy's now been on this drug for more than 2 years.
Yikes.
Now, I did read of a person who said she was on it from age 3 to 12.
Whoa.
But I don't know what her dosage was, what she was being treated for. Nancy, who is a baby, well, a toddler at this point, is taking it every 4 hours.
Yeah. Did that person who took it for a long time turn out?
She said that she was fine. She said she didn't have any long-term effects from it. I'm sure it's different for every person.
Well, I mean, of course, everybody's different.
Yeah. Back then, they weren't monitoring for side effects from long-term use. It was a common drug. It was prescribed often. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that everyone who took phenobarbital then or now is going to experience side effects.
100%.
Obviously, it varies by person. But some of the side effects of taking phenobarbital long-term can include hyperactivity, cognitive deficits, various psychological disturbances like depression, suicidal thoughts, nightmares, hallucinations, aggression.
This is a commercial for phenobarbital. You know when they're always like, side effects may include
all the most horrible things you've ever heard of. And this little toddler has been taking this since she was 3 months old. Every 4 hours, every single day, with an ever-increasing dosage. Nancy will eventually show signs of all of the side effects I just mentioned.
I was just going to say, I feel like you were describing Nancy.
Mm-hmm. Deb knew Nancy needed help that the pediatrician just couldn't provide. Mm-hmm. She mentioned to Frank that she thought Nancy needed counseling, but think about the time period. We're at like 1960 now. Frank was against therapy. He said, absolutely not. This is just a phase. All kids go through it. But he was away at work all day, so he's not seeing the reality of how Nancy behaves day in and day out. And when he was home, he would often play guitar, which Nancy loved.
Ooh, music.
She had a passion for music very early on. It was really the only thing that calmed her down a little bit. So Frank's like, see, she's fine. Look at her loving my guitar playing. Their differing opinions about what was best for Nancy drove a wedge between Frank and Deb.
Fuck. Well, I mean, that's kind of an age-old thing. It's like when you have a problematic child, it can really take a toll on the parents.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and especially Deb, because like she's seeing all this behavior, and then Frank's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, Deb's getting the brunt of it.
Well, it's just like the doctor. Like, oh, what are you talking about?
Mm-hmm. And it wasn't long before Nancy's aggressive and violent behavior was directed at her little sister, Susan. Once Susan began walking, Nancy would go over to her and just push her down on the ground. Susan would get up, start walking again, and Nancy would push her right down again. When Deb saw how Nancy treated her little sister, she brought up the subject of therapy again, but Frank wouldn't even discuss it, which just led to more fighting between them.
Yeah.
Things must have been good for a brief period at least, because Deb soon found out she was pregnant with baby number 3. David was born 6 weeks early, so even earlier than what Nancy had been. She was 5 weeks. He had a bit of a health scare as a newborn and had to be hospitalized, and Deb had a kidney issue around this same time and needed surgery. Surprisingly, Nancy was like Little Miss Caregiver. She doted on David. It was very different from her attitude towards Susan. While he was in the hospital, she picked out several of her own toys to give him. She made Deb take her shopping so she could pick out an outfit for him to wear when he got out of the hospital. She just wanted to take care of him. And she was the same way with Deb when she was recovering from her surgery, like always making sure she was doing okay. Can I get you anything, Mommy? Got her whatever she needed. During this time that Deb and David were recovering from their health scares, Nancy didn't have any nightmares or tantrums, and there were no screaming fits. She was super helpful around the house. I mean, she was only 3.5, but she constantly asked for jobs she could do to help out. Then as soon as Deb and David were back to normal, Nancy was right back to her old self. I just wonder what that was about. Like, Was she so fixated on her mom and brother that her brain wasn't dwelling on her troubles? And then when her mom and brother were healthy again, she turned inward and fixated on her own stuff? Like, I don't know. I just thought it was really interesting.
Bizarre. It's almost like, did you ever see the movie or read the book We Need to Talk About Kevin?
No.
Okay. I won't spoil anything, but it's people who have seen that, it reminds me a little bit of that situation.
Okay.
With the main character.
Okay. Things came to a head one afternoon when Frank agreed to take Nancy to the circus. She'd seen commercials for it on TV and really wanted to go, so Frank planned a daddy-daughter date for them. Just as they were about to walk out of the house, Nancy starts screaming, "I don't want to go, it's too far." And Frank is like, "But you said you wanted to go." She said, "No, it's too far." He said, "But we'll see the animals and we'll eat cotton candy." And she said, "Okay, I want to go."
I mean, girl, animals and cotton candy, yes, please.
As soon as they get to the car, "I don't want to go, it's too far." This went on for a while and Frank had no idea what to do. He brings her back inside, then she wants to go, so he gets her back outside. As soon as she gets to the car, more screaming. So he'd take her back inside. It's back and forth. Finally, he gets her back in the car, and even though she started screaming again, he did not let her out. He just drove straight to the circus. Later, he said that as soon as they got away from the house, she was fine. That's when he told Deb, "Okay, maybe we should try therapy."
Thank God. It only took 3.5 years.
He said something is happening to her.
Yeah.
Nancy began seeing a counselor just a few weeks before her 4th birthday. She went twice a month for 6 months, where they basically just evaluated her to see what might be causing her behavior issues, and then they did some psychological and intelligence tests. By the time her 6 months was up, Nancy's stutter had disappeared, and on her IQ test, she scored 134.
That's high, isn't it?
That's Mensa level.
Whoa. Did you ever take an IQ test?
No, have you?
No.
Be fun too.
Do you want to do it?
I might get depressed though, because it might be like you're a dumbass.
Dumbass. We're just two dumbasses telling each other stories.
Exactly. There are several different types of IQ tests. The most popular at that time was the revised Stanford Binet, which is what she took. Mensa requires a minimum of 132 on the Stanford Binet, and she got a 134.
Wow.
Deb and Frank had told the clinic that they were worried Nancy might have suffered brain damage at birth, but the psychiatric social worker said, well, her high IQ rules that out. Similar to what her pediatrician had said, the social worker was like, she's super smart. How could there be any brain damage? However, he did mention that she was deficient in her motor visual development and attributed that as the cause of her aggression, saying that because of her IQ, of her high IQ, she sets these really high goals for herself. And if she tries to do something that requires hand-eye coordination, like something as simple as tying her shoes, if she doesn't perform the task at the level she sets for herself, it drives her crazy.
Whoa.
And being so young, she doesn't have the tools to know how to cope with that.
Mm-hmm.
But he said, don't worry, she'll outgrow it.
I was going to say, so did they give her the tools to cope with it?
Right. No, of course not.
Why would they?
The other area of note was that based on her answers to a Roarshock test, that's the one with the splotches, they said Nancy's imagination wasn't as developed as other kids her age. They said the average kid might see up to 50 images in one splotch, but Nancy only saw one. And it was the same image no matter what splotch they showed.
Shit.
She could only see a butterfly.
Whoa. Have you ever taken a Rorschach test?
Mm-mm.
I have. And let me tell you a quick little anecdote here. I had a friend who was studying to be a psychologist.
Oh.
Like 10 years ago when I first moved here. And she had another friend that she was studying with, and they needed to do Rorschach tests and have volunteers come and do them.
Mm-hmm.
So I went and did one with this person.
How was it?
It was fun. It was interesting. But
yeah.
Then I never heard from her or my friend again.
Oh, ever?
Ever.
Kevin. They found out some shit about you.
I fucked up.
Yeah.
I took it seriously. It's not like I joked my way through it. I was just being genuine.
Yeah, they might have seen something.
What? Tell me.
I don't know. I wasn't there.
Not you. I'm just saying, like, to them, just tell me what it was. They're like, you're a murderer.
And we can
and
no
they're
longer
right.
speak
No,
to
I'm
you.
kidding.
God,
I'm
that's
just kidding.
turn.
I am a healthy individual in the mind. Continue, Kate.
I don't know how to go from that.
I'm
So
sorry.
she could only see a butterfly
Okay.
in each image. And again, he said Nancy would outgrow this. He was like, once she experiences new situations and makes more friends, this part of her personality will become more developed.
Okay.
But that was another problem. Nancy didn't have any friends. She had tried to play with the other kids in the neighborhood, but that was short-lived. She'd be outside with them and then 10 minutes later come in crying, saying that one of the kids hit her or said something mean to her. And eventually she just stopped going outside to play.
I get it. Kids can be real assholes to each other.
I'm not sure that it was the other
Oh,
kids.
it was probably her. I see what you're saying.
Well, I don't know. Once she started going to school, things didn't get any better for her socially.
Okay.
Academically, she was doing well. She was doing first grade work when she was in preschool,
Damn.
but she wasn't able to keep friends. The first friend she made at school was a girl who lived just down the block from them. Nancy brought her over to the house a few times to play, but then all of a sudden, they weren't friends anymore. And when Deb asked her what happened, Nancy wouldn't answer and just started crying. A few days later, Deb was doing Nancy's laundry, and inside one of the pockets of her pants was a note from that girl that read, "I hate you and you stink and stay away from me forever or I'm going to kill you." Like, what? By second grade, she was on a 5th grade level. So the teacher recommended she skip 3rd and go straight to 4th, which she did.
Nice.
Despite being so advanced academically, Nancy's teacher did say she was disruptive because she would often laugh out loud inappropriately, like she was in her own little world. She had something else going on in her mind that had nothing to do with class, and she would just start laughing. At home, Nancy's tumultuous behavior only got worse. She often took out her frustrations on her younger siblings. Susan suffered the brunt of it, but David wasn't spared. She constantly bullied them and would pit them against each other. Like if David and Susan were playing, Nancy would grab David and take him in another room and lock Susan out so that David only played with Nancy.
Yeah.
But then Nancy would turn around and throw David's toys against the wall, breaking them, or she'd take an object and hit him on the head with it, leaving a bruise. And her screaming tantrums were still a thing. It got to the point where it just became easier for everyone else in the family to cave to her demands because no amount of discipline changed her behavior. This, of course, put a huge strain on Deb and Frank's marriage.
I can imagine.
Frank started staying out of the house more and more. He joined a softball league that played on the weekends. So he was not only out of the house during the week when he was at work, but now he's out of the house on the weekends too. He started going out a lot more. He'd have business in New York City, which is like an hour and a half away. And rather than come home after, he'd get a hotel. He'd maybe see a Broadway show with a friend and go out for drinks after. Deb, unsurprisingly, starts to resent him for this because she's home alone with the kids and dealing with Nancy on her own while he's out having all the fun.
How come he gets to avoid the situation?
Exactly. So she confronts him and she's like, "I think you're cheating on me. You have to be. Like, why would you prefer to be out all the time and stay in hotels in New York when you could be home with me?" He insisted he wasn't cheating, but she didn't believe him. And he actually wasn't cheating on her at that time.
Oh, God.
But later he did start having an affair.
Okay.
Deb, sure that Frank was being unfaithful, had an affair of her own. It all got really messy, and eventually things came to blows.
Did she start having an affair first, or did he start having?
She did.
She did, because she thought he was.
She thought he was, yes.
Oh, and did he find out about hers and go and do his, or
No.
he just eventually did his?
He eventually did because she kept accusing him. And when they discussed this later, he said, "I just figured if you were just going to keep accusing me of it, I might as well
Might
do
as well
it."
go ahead and fucking do it. Oh, this is devastating.
I'm telling you, this whole thing is really sad.
Yikes.
So they discussed getting a divorce, and they both came clean about their cheating. And once they opened that can of worms, everything just kind of poured
Spilled.
out. They're just like spilling their guts. They'd both been bottling up so much emotion over the years, and finally, they were talking to each other about it. They talked for hours, and they both realized that getting a divorce wasn't a guarantee that their lives are going to get better. Neither of them wanted to be with anyone else, and they agreed that whatever was thrown at them or whatever Nancy was going to mean for their family, they'd have a much better chance of getting through it if they stuck together. And they were together the rest of their lives.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So this is the direct result of honest and open communication.
Look at that.
Hey, guys. Hey, everybody.
But again, think about this time period. Like,
No, I mean, because in this time period, from what I know, it's very much you keep everything in. You do not talk to each other that way. One person respects the other, and that's how it is.
the man is at work, the
man
wife
is
is
at
at
work.
home,
Yeah.
and she's got, she's dealing with the kids and
So kudos for them for, kind of defying the social norm.
absolutely, yeah. They contemplated taking Nancy back to the counselor, but thought that if she could just make some friends, her behavior would improve. They said, you know what? It's these damn city kids that are the problem and this crappy school system. We need to get Nancy out of the city, and then she'll thrive.
Then things are going to get better.
Wishful thinking.
Wishful thinking.
So the family up and moved to a house in the suburbs. Nancy was excited about this move. She did well in her new school, and she even made some friends, but of course, those friendships didn't last. Girls seemed to quickly turn on her.
Okay.
The one thing that seemed to be Nancy's escape was music.
Good.
Deb and Frank had bought the album for the musical Hair after seeing the show on Broadway. When they played it on their record player at home, Nancy immediately took to it. She became kind of obsessed. She'd sit on the living room floor right in front of the record player, turn the volume all the way up, and play the record over and over for hours.
She has good taste.
She
I'm
would
telling
listen
you.
to it at least 6 times a day.
That's crazy. I used to do the same thing at my grandparents' with the Sound of Music record.
That's sweet.
Thank you.
I used to watch Sound of Music all the time, like over and over.
It was the only record that I liked of theirs. I didn't know anything else, but I would just play the whole thing. And I would sit there in my little room and be like, doe, a deer, a female deer.
Which kid were you?
I always liked Gretel. I think she's the tiniest
The littlest?
one. The one who's like this cute one to go up to bed.
Yeah, that tracks.
She got all the attention.
I see where you're coming from.
And I was an only child. I had my teddy bears. Excuse me, continue.
I'm going to... This is going off the rails, and this is going to be a long episode anyway.
This is like 2.5 hours.
Frank and Deb were like, is it okay that we let her listen to Hair? Because there's a lot of sex and drugs in it. And Nancy was only 9. But it was literally the only thing that made her happy. So they were like, you know what? This is seemingly calming her down. Let's go with it. When the family got a cat as a pet, she insisted they name it Aquarius after the song Age of Aquarius.
I like this. I'm like in Nancy's style.
On the weekends, Deb started taking her to the record store where she'd pick out albums by The Doors, The Rolling Stones, Janis Joplin. Nancy grew her hair out to her waist and started embracing the whole hippie look.
Oh, girlfriend, yes.
She wanted to learn how to play guitar, so her parents bought her one. But
Whoa.
because she couldn't figure it out right away,
She got pissed.
frustrated. I think the motor visual deficiency came into play here.
Okay, I get that.
She started reading Rolling Stone magazine, OBS, since it was all about rock music, and was also drawn to the works of Kurt Vonnegut, who often wrote about the flaws in society, and J.D. Salinger, whose Catcher in the Rye discussed adolescent angst and alienation. She connected with those.
At 9?
Yeah, she's 9 or 10 at this point.
Damn, girl.
She read the New York Times every Sunday, particularly to see what it had to say about the Vietnam War, which she was strongly against.
Yeah.
Deb and Frank were glad she had found something she was interested in, even if they did feel she was maybe a little young for the subject matter that she was reading about and listening to. But still, her behavior was an issue, and it was developing into something pretty scary.
This is so interesting to me. Like, you have this very intelligent, very, connected to the times, to the news, to literature, to music, and obviously like this baby politician almost. But then
Baby politician.
baby politician. But then like her behaviors are really insane.
Yeah.
Okay, that it just strikes me because I'm like, she's amazing, but then I'm also like, okay, there's these problems that just haven't been fully addressed.
And keep in the back of your mind, what she experiences is not her fault.
No, of course not. I mean, there's an issue here.
But of course, at that time, they don't know that.
They don't know that.
One day, Deb noticed Nancy standing at the top of the stairs, dangling a paper bag full of something over the banister. And Deb asked, "What's in the bag, Nancy?" And with no emotion, Nancy said, "Aquarius." Deb
Kate.
asked, "It's okay. I can tell you ahead of time. It's okay.
Okay.
Deb asked, "Why is Aquarius in the bag, Nancy?" And Nancy said, "I'm going to throw him downstairs and see if he still lands on his feet." Deb's like, "No, you'll hurt him." And Nancy said, again, zero emotion, "I want to." Deb knew Nancy loved that cat. She would never want to hurt him. Nancy just had this dazed look in her eyes, like she was in a trance. And like I said, there was no emotion in her voice. She just had a blank expression on her face. So Deb runs upstairs and manages to get the bag from Nancy. Nancy tried to smack her mom in the face, but Deb was able to stop her. Then Nancy blinked a couple times and looked around and goes, "Why are we standing here?"
Oh my God.
Deb said, "You were trying to hurt Aquarius." It was clear to Deb that Nancy truly had no idea what had just happened. Nancy opened the bag and let Aquarius out and then ran to her room and bawled her eyes out for about an hour.
This is scary, genuinely.
It is, yeah. This trance that Nancy seemed to go into happened more and more. Deb and Frank decided she needed to go back to counseling.
Yeah.
Nancy was 10 years old at this time.
Okay.
They went to a new clinic because, remember, they had moved out of the city. And once again, Nancy was given multiple IQ tests and personality tests. The test determined that Nancy was now reading and spelling at a college level. But she was trailing in math, like behind where she should have been. She still had a motor visual deficiency, and she still didn't have a very rich imagination. The person that administered the test to her wrote up a report that I'm just going to summarize.
Okay.
It stated, Nancy perceives her interactions with other people in a negative way. She believes her parents ignore and reject her. She's insecure about her inability to do things on her own, and she believes intellectual achievement will lead to love and approval from her mom in particular. The report also stated that Nancy presents as an emotionally hungry child, and because she doesn't feel like she gets the love and attention she needs, this leads to anger, which causes her to take her frustrations out on her siblings and her peers. She feels inadequate as a person and has a lot of anxiety.
Me too, honey.
And from this report, the director of the clinic determined that Frank and Deb were the cause of Nancy's problems.
Hey.
He recommended therapy for Nancy, but also individual as well as group therapy for Frank and Deb, telling them, "You two have a lot of problems. Until you're able to work them out, Nancy will never be okay."
Nope, Frank and Deb got this. They worked out their marriage.
Exactly. They were shocked because at this point, their marriage was stronger than ever.
Yeah.
And they were also thinking, well, how is it that Susan and David are growing up in the same household and they don't have these issues? Since Nancy was a baby, doctors had blamed them, Deb in particular, for Nancy's behavior.
Right.
You're not feeding her enough. You're overfeeding her. You're spoiling her. The doctor running Deb's therapy session was horrid. It's really unfortunate because she's trying everything to help her daughter, but this doctor would literally yell at her during the group session. I mean, not just her. He put everyone down. And the medical doctors were no better. Nancy had allergies and would get these really bad respiratory infections, and she got pretty sick shortly after starting therapy. So her pediatrician prescribed her antibiotics and also aspirin for her fever. When the aspirin didn't do anything, he prescribed Atarax, which is a sedative. Less than an hour after Nancy took her first dose of Atarax, Deb heard her screaming up in her room. And when she went up to check on her, Nancy was banging her head against the wall over and over, like really hard. And she was pulling her hair out of her head.
Oh my God.
Deb was able to briefly restrain her before Nancy broke free, went over to her dresser, and started pounding it with her fist, then pulled all the drawers out, threw them across the room. Then she kicked one of the legs of her desk until it broke, and the desk came crashing down. Violent
Hulk
outburst.
smashing.
Frank had run up at this point, but it was like Nancy didn't even know her parents were in the room.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden, Nancy stopped and started singing. But it was like random phrases of songs, like, "Happy birthday to you. I'm a Yankee Doodle Dandy, and a Happy New Year." And then she started screaming again. Deb called the doctor, who said, she's probably just having an allergic reaction to the Atarax. Deb's like, "Okay, so what do we do?" And he said, just wait it out. Meanwhile, Frank has restrained Nancy, who is still screaming. But when Deb came in to let him know what the doctor said, Nancy, he kind of got distracted a little bit and he turned to look at Deb. And during this time, Nancy broke free and started punching herself in the face. She was screaming, "Who are you people? Why are you doing this to me?" Then she started laughing, and then she started singing, and then she started crying. Deb called Nancy's therapist, who said the same thing as the pediatrician, just wait it out. This went on all night. Deb and Frank were scared Nancy would hurt herself, so they stayed up all night taking turns restraining her. She'd go from screaming and violently thrashing to singing, to more screaming. By the morning, she started to calm down a bit, and she looked at her mom and said, "I know you. You're the nice lady from last night." And then she looked at her dad and said, "And you're the nice man from last night." Then she started singing again. This went on for another couple of hours, and finally she recognized her parents next to her and said, "Mommy, where were you all night? What day is it?" Over the next few months, things went from bad to way, way worse. She's now 11. On a rare afternoon that she interacted with some of the neighborhood kids, she was outside with them making bracelets in one of their lawns when her beads slipped off the wire. She was trying to pick them up, but some of them she couldn't find in the grass, and this sparked a reaction similar to the one that I just described. She starts screaming, pulling her hair out at the roots, and she was so worked up that she started hyperventilating. In her previous episode like this, the one after she'd taken the GoodRx, Deb had wanted to take Nancy to the hospital, but both the pediatrician and therapist told her not to. This time, though, Deb was like, fuck it, I'm taking her. Something is not right.
Yeah.
She took her to the ER, and Nancy was still hyperventilating, so the doctor laid her on a table in one of the rooms. And then he steps out into the hall with Deb, and the second he did, Nancy jumped off the table, slammed the door shut, and locked it, then pointed at the doctor, laughing. Security had to come unlock the door, and when they did, she just laughed and said, "I'm smarter than all you stupid motherfuckers."
Yes. I mean, awful, terrible. This is awful. This is awful. But she has some good one-liners as an 11-year-old. Also, this kind of reminds me of The Exorcist.
Okay, that's exactly what I thought, to be honest. Like, there is a lot
when Reagan's
of that
in the hospital?
Here. Yeah, there's a lot of that in here.
Whoa.
When Deb asked her therapist how she should handle the situation if something like this happens again, the therapist said, "She's just looking for attention. You should have ignored her." How are you going to ignore your child who is ripping her hair out of her head?
You can't not ignore that. You can't ignore that. Sorry, I double negatived myself.
I was like, wait, what? Nancy's swearing grew worse. She'd go up to her mom and say things like, "You don't know anything. You married that fucking shithead bastard." And to her dad, she'd say, "You should divorce that ugly bitch. This is your little girl." During dinner, she would throw her plate against the wall and it would shatter. At one point, she hurt her arm trying to break free from her dad's grasp because, she was trying to get away and he was like, "No, you need to come here." And she, was waving her arm around and she ended up, I guess, dislocating
her
it.
shoulder.
So they had to take her to the hospital. And when she walked in, she started shouting, "Look what my father did to me. He beats me. I want him arrested. Call the police." The staff knew Frank was not abusing her. Also, they remembered her from the last time she was there.
Right. I mean, and the last time she was here, she walked in and said, "Hey, motherfuckers.
I'm smarter than all of you."
I'm smarter than everyone. And they're like, "Okay, honey, calm down."
He wasn't arrested, but nevertheless, he's obviously very upset that his daughter would say something like that.
Yeah.
A few weeks later, Frank had a big work event in New York one weekend, and it was the type of thing that you would bring your significant other to. And all of his sales associates were all bringing their wives, and so he really wanted Deb to come. But they were concerned about leaving Nancy and her siblings with a babysitter. Her therapist said it would be good for her. However, she said leaving her for the weekend will show Nancy that you trust her. This is a good opportunity. They were hesitant, but they did hire a girl in college that someone had recommended to them just to watch the kids for that weekend. At the last minute, though, Deb also asked her mom to stay over for the weekend as well and help the sitter. And it's a good thing she did because If she hadn't, someone might have been seriously injured.
What's Nancy's relationship with the grandmother?
Deb's mom?
Deb's mom, yeah. I just mean, like, are they close? Do they see each other often?
So they do see each other because the mom does help out. And now,
gotcha.
And now other kids have come along. I mean, she is a grandmother to them.
So she's present, I guess is what I was trying to ask.
Yeah.
Got you. Thank you.
It all started the morning Deb and Frank were to return from their trip. While they were all sitting around the table having breakfast, Nancy just turns to her brother David and says, "You're a fucking little brat." The sitter said, "Nancy, that's not a nice way to talk to your brother." And then Nancy, wearing just her bathrobe and slippers, ran up to her room, pulled the screen out of her window, and jumped onto the roof of the garage.
Whoa.
I don't think it was far. I think it was just like a couple of feet.
Okay.
And she started shouting, "I want to die. I want to die. I'm going to kill myself." The entire neighborhood can hear her. Nancy wouldn't come back inside until the sitter apologized to her for saying that's not a nice way to talk to your brother. Finally, when the sitter does, Nancy climbs back in through the window, but grabs a pair of scissors from her desk, holds them up to the babysitter, and says, "I'm going to stab you to death, you fucking bitch." This poor sitter starts screaming and runs, and Nancy chased her all through the house with these scissors, down the stairs, up the stairs, down again. She only stopped when her grandmother, Deb's mom, intentionally tripped her. And when Nancy fell, her grandmother grabbed the scissors from her, and the sitter was like, "Gotta go," and she left.
Yeah.
Then Nancy got that look on her face like she was in this trance-like state, walked outside in her bathrobe, and sat on her bike in the driveway until Deb and Frank pulled up, just staring. Her eyes were completely glazed over, like she didn't even see her parents when they pulled up. When Deb called Nancy's therapist about what happened, as usual, she just kind of brushed it off. She said, "Oh, she's just acting out. She wouldn't have actually stabbed that girl." The therapist started singing a different tune, though, when at her next session, Nancy called her a fucking bitch and then proceeded to smash everything on the woman's desk. She threw all the books off the shelves. She threw an open bottle of blue ink at her therapist that basically just poured down her whole head. And she took a clock and threw it at the window with so much force that it actually crashed through the window and landed somewhere in the parking lot outside.
I don't know what to say.
Yeah, none of the doctors did either.
And I'm surprised no one was like, call a priest.
Only then did the therapist start to see the reality of what the Spungen family had been dealing with.
Yeah.
Like, they hadn't believed them this whole time. Like, oh, okay, now we get it.
And I bet Frank and Deb are like, see?
See? One night at home, Nancy woke up screaming in the middle of the night. And when Deb checked on her, she was crawling around on her bedroom floor saying, "They're after me. The sharks are after me. They're going to attack me and eat me." Full-on hallucination.
Whoa.
The next morning at school, Nancy was sitting in the counselor's office. She'd kind of had a fit on the way to school, so Frank took her to the office to be like, "You can sit here until you calm down." The counselor was like, "I got this." Mm-hmm. Sometime after Frank left, Nancy went into that trance-like state, stood up, walked out of the office and out into the hall, and the counselor called after her. I was like, "Nancy, you need to come back." But Nancy didn't seem to notice, and she just walked out the front door of the school. The counselor tried to chase her, but she disappeared. Nancy walked to a gas station and called her mom on the payphone, and in that emotionless tone said, "I'm at the Buck Road gas station. Come and get me." When Deb called the school to say that she'd found her, the counselor said, "I don't think Nancy belongs at this school." Not only was her school turning her away, but the clinic where she went for therapy decided to reevaluate her. And afterwards, they told the Spungens they were terminating Nancy's sessions there because there was nothing more they could do for her. Deb said, "Well, okay, what should we do from here?"
Next?
And this guy, who is the director of this psychiatric clinic, looks at Deb and says, "Damned if I know." Then he stood up and wished them luck.
Wow.
Yeah. There are so many people in this story that I feel should be fired. They're probably dead by this point, but
yeah,
damn. Here's the thing, though. That director of the clinic, he did write up an evaluation of Nancy that day that he did not share with the Spungens. Deb didn't obtain the record until after Nancy's death. The two most important sentences from his report that he did not share with Nancy's parents are this: "My diagnostic impression of Nancy is that she is a schizophrenic girl who is currently in a state of decompensation and regression with suggestions of probable continuation of her regression. The extreme rapidity of her regressions suggests that careful neurological studies be carried out." So he did have a strong sense of what her diagnosis might be, but he did not share this with her parents.
So why not refer them for those neurological tests?
Some doctors that Deb spoke with years later told her that the reason why he might have kept the information from them is because, and none of the reasons are good at all, but they said that it's possible he didn't tell them because he knew there was no hospital or psychiatric facility in Philadelphia that would take an 11-year-old. And they also told Deb that doctors, especially at that time, were sometimes reluctant to diagnose schizophrenia in a child, believing that she could outgrow it. Still, though, it's like, okay, great. If she outgrows it, awesome. But
how can you can treat it
they should
in
have
the
the
moment.
information.
Right.
Healthcare system.
I can't with this.
The 1960s of it all. It was not good.
This poor girl, but also like these poor people that are having to like deal with her behavior.
Mm-hmm.
I understand it's challenging.
It's bad all around.
I mean, kudos to Frank and Deb for not demonizing her and not giving up on her. Well, I don't know yet.
One of the risk factors for the development of schizophrenia is oxygen deprivation during pregnancy.
Which is when she was cyanotic.
Mm-hmm. And we don't know how long she was deprived of that oxygen.
Right.
Symptoms of schizophrenia can include hallucinations, lack of emotional response, memory loss, self-harm, aggression, the list goes on.
I didn't realize that, Kate. Mm-hmm. So that condition can later cause schizophrenia?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
It's not like the only factor, but
no,
it
course.
is a risk factor.
It's a risk factor. Mm-hmm. Whoa.
Had they just told this up front, the Spungens could have sought the proper help, but they didn't. The hallucinations were coming more frequently. Again, it was the sharks. It was always the sharks. And after one particularly bad episode, Nancy told Deb, "Mommy, I want to die. Please let me die." She then went to Deb's medicine cabinet and started gathering up old prescription bottles, painkillers, muscle relaxants. Deb caught her and made her give them up, at which point Nancy said, "You don't love me." A few days later, Nancy and Deb were watching TV together, and Nancy said she wanted to go to the science museum, but Deb said, "Well, we can't because it closes in a half hour." Angry, Nancy then picked up a hammer that her brother had been using earlier to fix something, and he'd left it out on the coffee table. She holds up the hammer and says, "Take me to the science museum or I'll kill you." Again, Deb's like, "I can't.
No.
They're about to close." Nancy then raised the hammer and brought it down hard on her mom's shoulder. Then she did it again.
Oh my God.
And again. When Deb managed to get a hold of her hand, Nancy used her free hand to punch Deb repeatedly in the chest. This fight went on for an hour, with Deb trying her best to fend her off. But she's getting tired. Like an hour of fighting a child that's holding a hammer. Finally, Frank got home from work and walked in on the scene and was able to pull Nancy away. After this incident, the psychiatrist prescribed Thorazine, an antipsychotic drug. Another night, after everyone had gone to bed, Deb was awakened by the sound of Nancy in the kitchen. She went in and sees Nancy gathering up all the knives. Deb says, "Where are you going with all those knives?" And in her trance-like state, Nancy says, "To stab them." Deb asks, "Who?" And Nancy says, "The brother and the sister."
Oh.
After several unsuccessful attempts at finding a school and psychiatric facility that would take Nancy, they finally landed on a place called Barton, located in Connecticut. It was a small private school that worked with quote-unquote disturbed children.
Problem kids. My next thing was going to be like, there's got to be some kind of facility that she could go to. Because like at some point as a parent, you're going to hit the wall.
Oh, yeah. Nancy seemed to thrive there.
Oh, shit.
The couple that ran it were this older grandparent-like type, and there were 20 kids total. They all lived in one big house together. They each had their own room. They had individual therapy, And it was a very structured environment. Like everyone had their chores and everyone kind of worked together. And Nancy started showing improvement almost immediately. After her first year there, it was like she was a different kid. She seemed happier. Her personal hygiene had improved. She was taking better care of herself. She was more social, more helpful around the house. Unfortunately, it was short-lived because when Nancy returned to Barton the following school year, the couple that ran it had been transferred to a different facility.
God.
And the new owners didn't feel Nancy was a good fit. So she got transferred to a place with older kids where she was the youngest. The new place, Avon, had way too many kids and not enough staff. And it's at Avon that Nancy started smoking cigarettes and doing drugs. There was a dealer right by campus that would sell drugs to these kids who are in there because they have problems. And to get the money for drugs, every time Nancy went home for like a holiday break or something, she would steal pieces of her mom's jewelry. It was also at Avon that she began to self-harm. While on campus, she had taken a pair of scissors and cut up her forearm. Her parents were thinking maybe this wasn't the best place for her, but it was really the only one around. It was hard enough getting her place to begin with, so the idea of finding someplace better that would take Nancy seemed impossible. Nancy's attitude began to improve when she met Jeff, another student at Avon. She was 14 and he was 15, and he played guitar in a band.
Oh, here we are.
She loved that he was in a band. Nancy and Jeff were having sex, and Nancy began to believe she was pregnant.
That's too young.
She hadn't taken a test. She just thought she was for some reason. So I don't know if she missed her period or what it was, but she believed she was pregnant. So she tried to perform an abortion on herself.
No.
By inserting a wire hanger inside of her, which perforated her uterus and caused her to hemorrhage. Thankfully, her counselor found her and got her to the hospital where the doctor confirmed that no, Nancy had never been pregnant. When Jeff left Avon the following fall, that was the end of his and Nancy's relationship.
Okay. No, probably for the best.
A few weeks later, she had a new boy on her arm named Roger. Roger was from Virginia and spoke with a Southern accent, and soon Nancy began speaking with a Southern accent. When she brought him home to meet her family, she was on her absolute best behavior, complimenting what an amazing mom Deb was and how much she loved her siblings. And so her parents were like, well, maybe this Roger kid is a good influence. After they all had dinner together, Nancy wanted to take a walk with Roger around the neighborhood, and she invited Susan to join them, which should have raised a red flag right there because she never wanted Susan anywhere near her. Sure enough, Deb spotted the three of them out the window, standing under a streetlight smoking pot. Susan was just 12 years old.
Reefer.
Deb freaked out because she didn't want Nancy's ways to rub off on Susan and David. But before Nancy went back to school, she gave Susan more pot. And when Deb found her smoking it in her room one day, she made Susan go to counseling, which was enough for her to stop because she was like, I don't want to end up like Nancy.
Yeah, I mean, and 12 years old is way too young.
A few days later, Nancy's school called to say she had run away. But not to worry, they said, we think she's in New York City. New York City?
New York City.
Nancy was missing for 3 days before she was found.
Okay.
It was clear the school environment she was in was not helping. If anything, it was doing more harm than good.
Yeah.
But the facilities that seemed somewhat promising were way too expensive, upwards of like $18,000 a year.
Oh, no, too much.
Which today would be about $138,000.
That's insane. That's like what college costs now.
Yeah. Even the Spungen's own rabbi was like, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I don't know anywhere that would take Nancy.
Okay.
Deb read about a psychiatrist in New York named Dr. Alan Cott who believed mental illness, at least some types of it, was caused by chemical imbalances in the body. He has since passed away, but he was a big deal in his field.
Wow.
Deb and Frank made an appointment.
Yeah.
Dr. Cott had them fill out a questionnaire and then come in for an interview. And one of the questions he asked was whether or not Nancy was affectionate as an infant. Did she like to be held, or did she react by stiffening up her limbs?
Oh, shit.
And Deb was like, how do you know that? And then he asked, in terms of her violent episodes, does she do things like pull her hair out? And Deb's like, you are describing my child to a T.
Yeah.
Dr. Cott told Nancy's parents that she was over-medicated as a child and was at risk for serious drug problems. Based on the questionnaire and his interview with them, he said, I'd have to examine her before I made a definite diagnosis, but I'd say Nancy's a schizophrenic.
Whoa.
Which was the first time they were hearing this diagnosis.
Anyone had ever said that?
Yeah.
And she's 15?
Yeah.
Okay.
14, 15. He told them he could help her, but he would need a solid month to monitor her, control her diet, get her some vitamins, and after a month, he'd be able to tell if she was responding to the treatment and could proceed from there. So Frank and Deb are ecstatic.
Yeah.
Finally some answers. Finally some hope.
Something.
They called Nancy's school to tell them the good news and said, we need to withdraw Nancy for a month. But it was a no-go. The head of the school basically said, oh, I know about that doctor. That doctor's bullshit. He's just trying to sell you a bunch of vitamins. Let me save you some grief and money. Don't do it. And they were like, but we're trying to help her. Like, we've tried everything. He seems to know what's up. Like, we need to do this. And the head of the school said, if you take Nancy out for a month, we're not just going to let her back in. She'll be put on the wait list. They're like, what the fuck? So they asked Dr. Cott what he thought they should do. And he said, if you take her out and then they don't let her back in, she won't have anywhere to go but home. And she has to go to school. He said, I can't in good conscience treat her knowing it could jeopardize her schooling. So that was that.
No.
However, the school later turned around and kicked her out under the guise of, you know what? You're ready to graduate early. You're so smart. Nancy didn't want to leave school and responded to this news by taking a razor blade and slashing the veins in her left forearm. The school got her to the hospital quickly and she was okay, but 2 weeks later, she did the same thing to her right arm. She was alone in her room at the time when she did it, and had another girl not found her when she did, Nancy would have died. She was rushed to the hospital in serious condition, and doctors said 5 more minutes and she would have bled to death. She required 21 stitches.
21.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot.
In one arm.
In one arm.
Now 15 years old. Yeah, so she's 15 this time.
Okay.
And her school, ready to see her leave, the staff arranged for her to take the SATs and fill out college applications without her parents' knowledge or consent. She ended up getting into the University of Colorado. Her parents were hesitant to let her go, but she was so excited, so they agreed.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Hold the brakes. What? At University of Colorado, there's not going to be help there for what she needs.
Right.
She's going to be in college.
Yeah.
I don't love this.
Just before she left for her first semester, her parents found out that she had gotten David, who was 12 years old now, into smoking pot, just like she had Susan. So they were actually looking forward to having Nancy be far away so that she couldn't hold so much power over her siblings. Unfortunately, shortly after Thanksgiving, which Nancy had stayed in Colorado for, she was arrested for receiving stolen property. Some locals that she had befriended were stealing skis from students and storing them in Nancy's dorm room. The stolen property charge was the least of her worries, however, because at the time, there was a huge undercover drug bust happening in Boulder, and Nancy had ended up buying drugs from an undercover federal agent.
Well, great.
The feds didn't want their cover blown because they still had about 2 months left on this drug bust. So they told her parents if she left school and Boulder immediately, the ski theft charge would be expunged and she wouldn't receive a federal warrant for the drug purchase. Interesting bargaining tactics. Let's just kick you out of your school and not offer any type of drug counseling or anything. We just don't want you to jeopardize our drug bust.
Yeah, great. Amazing.
Her parents felt backed into a corner and felt they didn't really have a choice other than to take her out of school. This was a huge blow to Nancy because she had really liked it there. She really liked skiing. It's why she was so excited about going to Colorado. So this is like one more giant step back.
I'm going to ask, and if you don't know, it's fine, but like at this time, when she's going to college, she's by herself. She's 15.
Mm-hmm.
She's 15.
Yeah.
Is she medicated? Is she taking some kind of drugs to, I don't know.
Like what kind of drugs?
I don't know, like to help with her conditions.
I don't think she's on the Thorazine anymore.
Okay.
She's just taking illegal drugs.
She's just medicating. She's
self-medicating, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh my God, this poor girl.
So she's upset that she's been kicked out of school. Her parents try to convince her that, hey, there are other schools out there. But Nancy said, what's the point? I'm going to die before I'm 21. I'm going to go out in a blaze of glory. I'll make headlines.
Oh, that's terrifying.
And she would be right.
And she did.
When Deb started unpacking some of Nancy's things from college, she found a bunch of syringes and spoons. And it was clear Nancy was doing heroin. They tried putting her in another mental hospital, but their insurance ended up dropping them, so they had to pull her out. They encouraged her to start working, but she couldn't keep a job.
Yeah.
Instead, she spent most of her time meeting up with friends in Philadelphia and going out to rock clubs. Drug dealers were in and out of the Spungen home. Nancy was bringing home random guys on the reg. The rest of the family couldn't take it anymore, and Frank and Deb made the difficult decision to kick her out.
God. This is what I was saying. You can only do so much and go so far.
Yeah.
Like when does it not become your problem anymore?
And they've got these two other kids who are younger who they're also trying to protect because Nancy is...
She's a bad influence.
Not only that, but she's can
violent.
Cause physical harm.
Yeah. So you protect your other two kids. That is a really rock. That's like a rock and a hard place.
Between rock and a hard place.
Thank you.
Just before Nancy turned 18, they told her they would help her move to New York. They said, you're always talking about the music scene there, and there's so much for you there, so we're going to help you get an apartment. Nancy was thrilled, and the move seemed like a good one at first. She got a small apartment in Chelsea with her parents' help. She fixed it up really nice. She got a job at a small shop sorting clothes, and when her mom came to visit after a couple of weeks, she was the hostess with the mostest. Can I get you some iced tea, Mom? Do you need more ice? I have more ice. What else can I get you? She started hanging out at CBGB's in Max's Kansas City, two of the hottest spots for bands like the Velvet Underground and the New York Dolls, and artists like Andy Warhol.
Andy. So how old is she in New York right now?
17.
17.
But she also quickly started doing a lot of drugs and would call home constantly begging for money. Her negative perceptions of interactions with other people were still very much present. She'd call her mom and complain that nobody at CBGB's liked her, that everyone hated her, just like she had done when she was a kid in school or a toddler out playing in the yard with the neighborhood kids. Mm-hmm. Once she found the punk rock scene, she felt she'd really found her place.
Oh, good.
And she found that one way to meet musicians was by supplying the bands with drugs. It was kind of like her way in.
Okay.
She even wrote articles for a local rock paper in Greenwich Village about the punk groups coming up. She got to know Debbie Harry from Blondie.
Whoa.
They hung out a lot. This is before Blondie was big.
Sure.
And Nancy always said, just wait, Debbie's going to be a star. She knew the Ramones. You could call her a groupie, which at that time, the groupies were on the same level as the bands. Yeah. It was a relatively small scene, so everyone knew each other, and she was loving it. She needed money, though. And soon, she got a job as a topless dancer in Times Square. This led to her doing sex work. She was really proud of herself because she was making enough money to pay her bills, but it also meant she had money to support her heroin addiction. Her addiction got so bad that she got fired because, as she said herself, guys don't want a girl with track marks.
Man, that's a hard statement.
Yeah. She got on a methadone program, which did help. Methadone is an opioid that is supposed to help ease withdrawal symptoms from heroin. I guess it's kind of like the lesser of two evils in a way.
Yeah.
But 4 weeks later, she was shooting heroin again.
Fuck.
And she ended up ODing.
Okay.
A friend of hers found her and got her to a hospital in time where she recovered. And then after a year in New York, her lease came up for renewal. But Nancy had other plans. a lot of the punk bands were going to London. Debbie Harry was going to London, a lot of her friends. And she had a thing for Jerry Nolan and Johnny Thunders of the New York Dolls who had gone to London. She wanted to get into the music business there. So she started saving up. She gradually weaned off the methadone, and by her 19th birthday in February of 1977, I wrote down the wrong date, and I had to do the math. By her 19th birthday, she was off drugs completely. She gave up her Chelsea apartment, put her furniture in storage, and left for England the beginning of March.
Whoa.
She met up with some friends, and they introduced her to more people on the music scene. And within a few days of arriving in London, some people invited her to a party. And she's like, hell yeah, of course I want a party. And it was at this party that she met the bassist for the British punk band, the Sex Pistols. His name was Sid Vicious. And we will learn all about him next week.
Oh my God, Kate.
So next week we'll talk about their relationship.
Okay.
So this is 1977. I mentioned at the top of this episode, she dies in 1978. So things go pretty quickly from here. But yeah, I just thought it was interesting to learn about her because I hadn't heard anything about her. It was always about Sid. And then,
right, because he was the famous one.
Yeah. And when you do hear about her, it's just in relation to him. And it's just about their courtship, or I don't know if you call it a courtship, but it was just their relationship from the time they met in London and then they get to New York. So yeah, I just thought it was interesting finding all that backstory because you see why she is the way she is and like why some of her behavior turned people off of her because they're so mean to her in London, and just like the people that she's hanging with, like awful. They hated her.
Sucks. That's awful.
But yeah, let us know what you thought. Hopefully you're still listening to this. I think it was kind of long. It wasn't as long as I thought it would be. Hopefully you'll tune in next week. Next week we will talk about the night she died. It's officially listed as a murder.
Wow.
And it could be. And maybe it was Sid, and maybe it wasn't, and maybe it wasn't a murder.
You can't deny also like the schizophrenia part of that. And you can't deny the delusions.
There are a lot of factors.
Because, yeah, I'll just leave it there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Damn.
Oh, you'll find out a lot next week.
Oh, fuck.
So that's it for now. Leave us your comments on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, or Spotify at...
Sorry, I'm just still at Horrorwood Podcast.
Like, at?
Sorry, I'm just thinking about this. This is crazy.
Or you can send us an email at...
horrorwoodpodcast@gmail.com.
Or you can pop on over to Patreon at...
patreon.com/horrorwoodpodcast.
And as always, don't do murder. And also don't do being mean to people because you don't know what they might be going through.
100%.